Hello, so I have gone through each pocket strip and I've basted along the bottom edge to hold those box pleats in place, and then I've just popped the clips from those at the top. So these are open at the top, these box pleats, but the clips, if I move them over to the top edge of the pocket there, it just keeps the pocket looking nice and neat and tidy, ready for the next stage of our sewing. I'll pop that back on there. I've laid my pocket strips out on my backing panel, and I've laid these out in the same order that they appear on the panel that you buy. And that's 24 is the first strip, then 12, 23, 10 and 14. And I'm going to keep it the same design. If I was making two, then in the other one I'd mix them up a bit so that it's more fun to find the pockets if they're in different places. I'm just going to make sure that I keep that merry and bright pocket in the middle because I think that looks nice. I think that's your Christmas Day pocket. So we're now ready for the next step, and what we're going to do is take each strip one at a time, fold over the edges and the bottom, fold under the bottom, place it onto these squares here and sew round it. So I'm going to do one strip at a time. I'm going to use pins to hold it in place. So let's move these ones out of the way for now. And we'll just concentrate on this first strip that goes at the top of our panel. So the first thing that I'm going to do is turn that over. And I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to fold back that white border at the edge there. It's about 1 centimetre deep, and I'm going to make sure my iron's switched on and turn that back up a bit. I don't like to leave it on in between the processes where I'm working with it. Hold that in place and that will press a nice crease. And that crease is just at the edge of where that green is, so you don't really see any of the white border coming through. Then I'm going to swivel that round and I'm going to do the same on the other side. It's a bit trickier to see with the paler background squares, but I'm just going to do that. Make sure it's about 1 centimetre. There we are, so that crease is now pressed. Now that I've done the sides, I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom. So I'm just going to fold that bottom up. Oh, it's hot on my fingers. There we are. So as I'm going, I'm just making sure that I'm just folding up by 1 centimetre. Do be careful that you don't burn your fingers. And I'm just going to press that up all the way along. There we go. So I've now pressed up the entire white border at the bottom edge of that pocket. There we go. Switch the iron back down. And I'm now ready with these bits folded over to place that onto my backing panel. So now that all of that white border has been folded and pressed over, you should find that your pocket strip fits nicely on top of the coloured squares that you have in your background. So I'm going to start on one side. I'm going to match that up as best I can. Don't worry if there's a little bit of the colour peeping through, that actually looks quite nice. And then what I'll do is I'll take a pin and I'll pop that through the middle there, just to keep that in place. And I'm going to do that with each and every pocket. Here we go, and I'm making sure I'm not pinning my work to my ironing board, which is something that tends to happen with this. Here we are, so make that nice and lined up. So each pocket that you have, as well as having a pretty picture on the front, also has a pretty colour on the inside of the pocket too. So a different colour for each square and a different print. Here we are. I think somebody has had a lot of fun designing this. It's got so many lovely details. Yeah. Number 24 right at the beginning there. So I've got one pin in the centre of each pocket there, and the next stage I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew along the edge, down here, all the way across the bottom and back up to the top, and that will be my first strip in place. Once I've done that, then I'm just going to repeat the same process for each strip until all of the strips are attached to the backing. Now, because I've already attached the wadding, I'm going to sew through all those layers down here, along here and up here, and that gives it a nice sort of, that nice quilted quality. The other thing that I want to mention is I wouldn't pin them all in one go and then sew them all. And the reason why is because by the time, if you do all of your pressing and pinning, and then you do all of your sewing, by the time you get back to the bottom again, some of these lovely crisp pressed edges that you've made will have started to come undone a little bit, and it will just make it a bit trickier. So I would always say press, pin, sew, press, pin, sew, press, pin, sew for each strip. And it does mean having your ironing board set up next to you, but I think that taking that bit of extra time will make it look all the better, and it'll be easier to sew as well. So let's go over to the sewing machine and get that bit done now. So I'm over at my sewing machine. I'm now ready to attach my pocket to my backing fabric. So just make sure that you've got a nice clear space to work in, because the panel is quite big and you just want to have a bit of space to let it lay over the side of your sewing machine. I'm going to make sure that folded edge is in place, pop it under my machine, and then lower the presser foot over the top of the work. I'm going to just lower the needle now, so you can, it depends on the machine you've got. I have a button to lower my needle, but just so I can show you what I'm doing, I'm just going to hand wind the needle into the fabric. And just looking at it, I can see there that my needle has gone in right at the top edge and about a couple of millimetres, maybe 3 millimetres in from this edge, and that's where I want it to be. I'm going to start off by doing a couple of back stitches. I'm going to come all the way down to the corner, pivot round and go all the way along the bottom in one go. Because I'm now sewing through the wedging as well, the stitches can sink in a little bit, so I'm going to increase my stitch length to 2.8. So just if you've got a manual one, just go sort of on the towards 3 and that'll be fine. You can test on a scrap first if you want to see how it looks. I'm going to do about 3 stitches forward and then 3 back to lock in my stitches, and then off I go. Now you want to go nice and slow, take your time, make sure that the thread hasn't got caught up underneath and nothing is pulling. And I'm just doing it by eye. So this is where it's a bit trickier, because you haven't got you can't see your seam guide to tell you, you're just doing it by eye. But this is the beauty of a handmade project. If it wobbles a bit, it just makes it more wonderful. I've got my needle down in my fabric and I'm now ready to pivot round the corner. So making sure that your needle's down, you lift your presser foot and you swivel round. Because that's going to end up in the nook, I'm just going to fold it like that there. Just check, just have a little look, so you know, am I about the right stage? You want to be the same distance in all the way round, and that looks to be about right. If it wasn't, if I'd stopped too soon, what I would do is I'd lift, turn back round, put back down, and I'd just hand wind one more stitch, and then I'd just check to see if I was happy. If in doubt, stop early and go round the corner, because you can always wind an additional stitch. It's more difficult to go backwards. So let's keep going. And take your time with this. What I do every few stitches, because we're going through this wedgy backing as well, is to stop my fabric from puckering and pleating. Sometimes when your presser foot's pressing down on that fabric, it can draw the top layer along and the back layer sort of gets behind. So every few stitches I'll just lift my presser foot, smooth it all along, and then carry on again. And then remember that you are going to go right over the top of those box pleats. And hopefully I'm trying to keep my fingers as much as possible out of the way so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm leaving the pins in place. The presser foot isn't going over the pins at any point in time. And I'm not tugging on the fabric here, I'm not pulling it from the back. nice and slow. Never ever sew in a rush. That is the best advice I can give you. In other words, if it's the 30th of November, don't make an advent calendar. Luckily today is September, so we can take our time. And we talk about creating a nice sewing space. Create a space in your house for sewing, but also a space in your diary as well. And you can put some lovely music on in the background and make it a nice, special, relaxing time. I'm coming back towards the end of that corner now. Let's have a look. Is that about right? Yep. So I'm ready to turn the corner and I'm going to come back up to the top. Don't worry if it's not absolutely perfectly the same. Now, as I approach the top, I'm going to prepare to do my back stitch. So I'm getting to the top now. I'm going to hold down my back stitch button, or if you've got a lever, you're going to press the lever and do a few stitches. And that's done. So I'm going to trim off the threads at either end, but what you should now have is something that looks like that. So it's down here, along and back up again, about 2 or 3 millimeters in from the edge, all the way along. Now at the moment the pockets aren't separated. Don't worry about that for now, we're going to come back to that. What we're going to do is just repeat that exact same process for all 5 strips. So if you go and do that, and I shall see you back in a few moments for the next step. Lovely, so these pocket strips have now been sewn onto the backing panel and we're now ready to separate the pockets. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to stitch in between each box pleat, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's move over to our sewing machine. I'm going to pop my panel underneath there, draw it through so that we're at the position of the first pocket, and in fact I'm going to get rid of the clips on the next rung down in order to make a bit of space there. I'll get rid of these clips too, just so that I don't have anything getting in the way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to position my work, I hope you can see this okay, so that my presser foot and my needle are just right above the crease there. You can see if I pull at the top there, you can see that just opens up that box pleat, and you'll see a grey dotted line there, and that's what you're going to follow. And that grey dotted line should be sitting roughly on top of the border between the 2 background colours of the pocket fabric. So, or rather that's printed onto the backing fabric. So what I'm going to do is just line up, put my foot down, and then I'm going to hand wind my needle, and I want my needle to go in between the box pleat. So just if you're not 100% sure if it's there, just lift up your foot and take a look, and then lower the foot again. I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward, a couple back, and then I'm just going to stitch all the way down that grey dotted line, and I'm always going from the bottom of the pocket up to the top. It's just much more difficult to do it the other way around, and you might also end up with a bit of a pleat or a pucker at the end. So I'm going to go a few stitches forward, a few back to lock my stitches, and then off I go. Oops. And I don't want to catch that pocket fabric, I want to keep that out of the way. I'm going in between the box pleat. So this is a little bit tricky. Hopefully you can see okay what I'm doing there. When I get to the top, I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches. I'll trim those threads off nice and close. So what you want to have, I'll trim that thread off there as well. So I've now separated those two pockets by stitching in between them. So that pocket now has been created. And once the box pleat sits flat, you don't really see that stitching. So I'm going to go and do that for each of them. So this one again, put the needle right in here, in between the two, stitch all the way up to the end. If the pockets aren't sitting precisely on top of here, don't force it. Put it where the pocket wants to go. You don't want to sort of be pulling and twisting and creating stress in the fabric at all. If it wants to sit slightly to one side of that background colour, that's okay. Look, that one does want to sit slightly to the side, that's fine. Let it go where it wants to go rather than forcing it and creating sort of pulls and pleats in your fabric. And just go straight lines from the bottom up to the top with a back stitch at either end, separating each of those pockets. I'm going to show you one more time how I did that, and then I've got 23 more to do. So you might want to make yourself a cup of tea, but when you come to this part, it's going to take you a little while. Right, foot down, hand wind needle. It's not quite in the right position, so I'm lifting the foot and I'm moving the fabric over. Now I can see that needle is going right slap bang in between that pleat. Pull the fabric apart, lay it down nice and flat where it wants to go, and a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and off I go, sewing along the grey line, making sure that I am not catching any of that printed pocket front. A few stitches back at the end, just to secure things, and I'm done. I hope I did that nice and slowly enough and that you could see clearly what I was doing there. And as you get to the bottom of your panel, you'll find that you're an absolute expert at this, as you've got quite a lot. You've got 25 times to practice. So there you go, you can hopefully see that the stitches are just running in between the pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each of my pockets, and then we're very nearly there. We've just got the back to do after that. So I hope you're enjoying this, and I shall see you in a moment. So all of the pockets have now been stitched on, and I'm just going to do one sort of finishing touch to the front panel area. On the instructions, it very helpfully says quilt as desired. What I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to sew top stitch round the border of this red frame that you have around your pockets. Apart from that, I'm not going to do any more top stitching or quilting. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, do some decorative stitches in the white areas here. I think you've got so much detail going on that you don't really want to do anything more than that. So I've increased my stitch length to 3, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to keep my white thread, and I'm going to start at the top corner there, and I'm just going to go round, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around that border, and just to give it that a little extra touch. And because you've got the wadding on the back, the stitches kind of sink in and create a nice quilted border. So I'm just going to carry on round until I get all the way back round to the end, and then we'll be ready to attach our back panel.